Hello, everyone, and welcome to this 2025 G Plus European Stakeholder Forum, which is this time all about vessel operations in our expanding offshore wind industry. An event that we today is co-hosting with IMCA. I'm Lisbeth Frömling, the chair of the board in G Plus, and also I'm the head of QATC in Ørsted, and my co-host is Ian. And Ian is the CEO of IMCA. So we have a packed agenda today for the next 2 hours. First, we will see Mariana Carvalho, who will give us an insight to why we need this webinar to be exactly about vessel operations. Then Miriam Bufferson from Seaway 7 will give a presentation of how to be thinking differently about incidents in offshore marine construction. Then Miriam will be followed by Rice Jones from IMCA, who will talk about walk to work and personal transfer. And finally, Henrik Drossman from RWE will present vessel requirements and assurance in the industry we are in. After the presentations, we will have a panel discussion. You will have an opportunity to ask questions at that point. But please, during the session, you can use the interface on Zoom to put your questions in, and we will pick from these questions when we get to the panel discussion. So first of all, again, thank you all for joining, and I hope we will have a really good event together today. G Plus at a glance. I have been with G Plus now for 5 years and find it extremely valuable that we have the opportunity to come together and work to make our safety performance better and really make an impact in getting people home safely every day. We do a lot together. We run a number of work streams in areas where we, based on risk, agree that this is an area where we can actually gain value from working together. We get our good practice guidelines out of it, and we also work on safe by design together, and we learn from incidents together. So we share our data. It's a very open way of working together. We have no competition when it comes to safety, and the fact that we can come together here as more than 25 members and associates and share our experiences and knowledge and work to all the time improve safety in the industry. That is just brilliant. These are the members of G Plus and the associates. So yeah, it's a lot of us now, and we are very well represented in the industry, both when it comes to developers and operators and suppliers in general. When we look at the next slide, then we have our incident data reports where everybody who are part of G Plus submit their data quarterly, and we look at the trends and the risk that comes out of it. This is something that the Energy Institute help us with. We work in partnership with Energy Institute, as you might know, and they have really been the ones setting this up for us, and who are also giving us the trends and the ability to benchmark within the industry. The good practice guidelines that come out of the work streams we do together. People sign up for working groups and voluntarily put their efforts in to make sure that we get guidances that we can use, all of us, to have an aligned approach to some of the most high-risk work that we do. And finally, we also do safe by design workshops in G+, also all the time learning in this area. A very important part of what we do is to share incidents and learn from them together. I really hope that you know our toolbox tool, and that you know that you can sign up to actually pull out incidents from this and learn from them, share them, actually use them in your toolbox talks if that's possible. We have that openness between us that we share, both when we have very serious incidents and especially those that have big impact on people or big potential. and we try to learn from them together. In the board, this is ongoing conversation. When things has happened, how did it happen, and what learnings came out of it. And I really hope all companies that are part of G Plus use those actively, and also remember to put them in when incidents happen, because that's the best way for us to learn. This is again Energy Institute who has developed the tool, and who's making sure that we can pull from the knowledge that sits in there. And I think with the way they also analyze the data, we get the maximum output out of this. And the next slide, if someone can do, yeah, no, that is the next slide. I'm sorry, I should also mention the life-saving rules that were on the slide before, and the wind turbine safety rules. These two areas are both extremely important for us. The wind turbine safety rules is something we work on together with safety on, very much about our safe systems of work, and something that is very much in use in the different companies. The life-saving rules was something we developed because there are so many new companies coming into the business. So both companies that are already members, but also new suppliers coming in that do not have their own life-saving rules. They are made fairly simple on purpose, and yeah, they're very, very close to my heart. I think it's very important that we over time actually are aligned on our life-saving rules, and they are implemented already in Ørsted. I said I hope you also implemented them in your parts of the industry. And with that, to the next slide. Sorry, Mariana, I overlooked that. We have over the last period of time published no less than 10 new documents, and this is quite a high number in a fairly short time. I think it's great to see the outputs that are being delivered. It's all in areas that we really need, and I hope you all put in efforts to actually to implement them in your company. The most important ones to mention today is, of course, the report that came out of the workshop that was done together with IMCA on Walk to Work, but also the release of the second edition of the Transfer Good Practice Guide, as these two are very much connected to the presentations today. So I'm sure the presenters will come into this, especially Rai, who's doing presentation today. And with this introduction, I will hand over to Ian to say a few words about IMCA.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to support G+. And I think we've been developing a great relationship together. We've got a common focus to improve safety in the offshore energy industry. So I'm the CEO of IMCA. I joined 2 years ago, but I have also been on the board for a number of years and enjoying this role in improving safety across the world. Next slide, please. So IMCA was formed over 52 years ago. We started our existence solving safety issues in the oil and gas industry. But of course, over the 52 years, we've expanded significantly. We truly are now international, and we have 800 members in 65 countries. So we have a huge opportunity to gather that data from those members. And we also have some members who are actually regulators in those countries, for example, the UK HSE, NOPSEMA in Australia, Brazilian Navy, and BSEE in the US. So we have a great opportunity to work together with national regulators to help improve and introduce new regulations where required. Similar to G+, we develop best practice guidelines, we develop information notes, and we have over 700 of those items in our technical library. They'll cover all aspects of offshore marine construction. I guess the key differentiator probably with G+ is that we tend to focus on the vessel and the underwater side of the business, and G+ would focus more on the on the turbine itself, which is why it's such a great collaboration and why we are keen to support on the related issues. Again, similarly to G+, we generate what we call safety flashes. They're all available on our website. We currently have around 2,500 safety flashes, which are completely free and open for anyone to view. You can search by different types of incident, or you can just search by keywords. So if there's one thing that people do today, please go and look at our safety flashes. As Elizabeth said, use them in your safety moments, use them in your toolbox talks, just use them. It's one of the most important tools that we have in our toolbox. We also help improve competency in areas of diving, dynamic positioning, and ROVs. So we have got many people who've been certified through IMCA-related competence frameworks, if you're interested. And we also have a vessel assurance system, which I think Henrik's going to talk more about vessel assurance, which clearly is key to choosing the right vessel, choosing a safe vessel, choosing a vessel that is fit for the job. And we have over 1,700 vessels in our eCMID system that are constantly being inspected every year. Next slide, please, Mariana. Similar to G+, we have been collecting safety statistics and publishing them for over 25 years. This is just going back approximately the last 20 years. Every year we issue a safety report. Again, that report is available on our website. And the black line, you can see that huge improvement in incident frequency rate. So our total recordables over that period have dropped from a true figure of 5.5, and today we are around a true figure of 1. What I'm really pleased to say is that, over the last 20 years, introducing behavioral-based safety, we've seen a huge introduction in safety observations. And there's a clear correlation here that we can see that more observations, more people discussing near misses and observations tends to result in an improvement in incident frequency. So I think that's what I really like about this slide. You can see the clear correlation of people stopping the job, changing the culture, talking about potential incidents, for example. But of course, what I see here is that we started to flatten off now. So the improvement isn't as much. And unfortunately, of course, we still have some fatalities every year. So I'm pleased that Mariam is going to present alternative ways. What we need to do with this data is to analyze it. We need to understand why things are happening. We need to understand what can we do about it. So we'll be launching our next annual safety report within the next couple of months and expect to see some action plans coming out from there as to what our learnings have been and how we're going to improve. And I say I'm really pleased to see Mariam digging into our data and trying to look at it from different perspectives. Next slide, please, Mariam. So we do break down. Last year, we had nearly 1 billion man-hours with 960 million hours of safety data come in from all of our contractors. That's slightly different from the data that G+ collects, which is predominantly from developers and from OEMs. Ours comes only from contractors, and much of this is offshore, but some of it, of course, does result in onshore construction logistics types of activities. For the last 2 years at least, and I think it's the last 3 years, you'll see that line of fire has been the largest source of incidents. All of these incidents, of course, are important, and we have to work on them. But we'll have a specific task force this year looking at why line of fire accidents happen and what we can do to prevent those. Next slide, please, Mariana. So the key campaigns that we have for this year, we're looking at human performance. HOP or Safety New, is we've got many of our developer members and our contractor members starting to introduce human and organizational performance. We had Todd Conklin, the guru, present at our conference in November last year. We've also got a big campaign on underwater ship husbandry. It's one of the biggest killers in the offshore energy industry. This is when people are repairing ships, typically close to shore, and there's lots of unfortunate incidents and too many fatalities. The other big area that we're seeing too many incidents, and we identify this from our vessel assurance program, is confined space entry. Again, it's another killer in the marine industry. So we're working together with other trade associations to impact confined space entry. And finally, the Walk to Work initiative, which we're doing in collaboration with G+, and Reese will talk about that in much more detail to show what we're doing on that one. So that's really just a snapshot of IMCA, some of the findings we have from our rich source of data, and some of the work we'll be doing this year. And with that, Mariana, I will hand over. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Mariana Carvalho. I'm a technical manager with the G+, and we thought before we hand you over to our guest speakers today, that we should spend a little bit of time to understand what was it in the G+ data that made us think that this particular topic would be a good choice for a stakeholder forum webinar. Before I get into the data proper, I thought I'd just pause and show you that you can access pretty much everything that I'm going to show you through our Power BI dashboard on our website. It contains all of our incidents back to 2014. And so you can slice and dice it as you like, interrogate the database to find the information that you're after. And I'll show you some screenshots as I go through, so hopefully that entices you to go and look for yourself. It has the data up to 2023. We have received the 24 data from our members. We're in the process of kind of validating and analyzing that. I'll allude to some of the trends that we're seeing, but we're not yet in a position to share that with you. The report is due to come out in June, as it has kind of in previous years. I'd like to start with this slide when I talk about our data because it just shows the growth in the industry in recent years. This shows work hours reported for development, construction, and operation sites, and we've doubled in kind of pretty much doubled every 2 years within this period, and that is continuing in 2024. We're looking to a 27% increase in the size of the database for 2024. And this slide again, just so it shows you work hours, and it's for the region, and each donut, the size of the donut is kind of representative of the amount of hours in the database for that region. And if I was to show you this slide for a couple of years ago, it would look very different. APAC would be there, the US probably not so much. You know, if we were to look 3 years before that, we might be in a position where we'd probably be showing you the UK and rest of Europe, you know. So just to think of how much our industry has grown in what is a relatively short amount of time, both in just overall work hours, but in spreading out of sort of a Northern European base is quite interesting and gives context to everything that we're going to talk about today, which is vessels. And so this is the first screenshot from our Power BI, and it is busy, but I'll talk you through. So this is a dashboard, one of the first that you can see in the Power BI, and all I've done here is if you look on the top right-hand corner, you'll see the top five work processes, and I've clicked on vessel operations, which is the second in the bar chart, and I've underlined it there in red. So that means that everything else in the slide is now changed, so that all of the other graphs reflect just the number of incidents in the vessel operation work processes category. And so if I draw your attention to the two line charts at the bottom, you can see why we started thinking, we should be looking into these incidents a little bit more. So we had a sharp rise in the overall number of incidents. And when we try to sort of normalize that with the overall work hours, so we don't get work hours for vessel operations or for kind of a particular vessel. So this is overall work hours, but still we see an increase in the rate. And I should say also that when we say incidents there, we mean everything that's covered in the actual consequences that are in the pie chart on the bottom left. Okay, so asset damage, near misses, everything goes into the word incidents for here. So yes, we wanted to look into this a little bit more. You might expect that because I have clicked vessel operations that once you look at the incident areas, everything is going to be vessels. But if I had not, SOVs and jackup barges, jackup vessels and barges would still be in that top 5. So we have really seen an increase in the prevalence of vessels in our database and in the number of incidents. Looking at the consequences, you'll see there on the bottom left that half of the incidents reported are asset damage only incidents. So when you dig into those, that's when you start to understand a little bit more what's going on. And primarily the top cause of incidents there is actual thrusters and propellers being snared. And the cause, kind of the incidents below that is when we start seeing kind of some engine fires and hydraulic leaks coming in, and essentially kind of people finding assets already damaged, so to speak, and reporting that. And so it gets kind of categorized and comes into our database. We do see a limited amount, like some contact between the vessel and primarily kind of harbor, quaysides, pontoons, as well as sort of CTVs making hard contact kind of with foundations. So that comes in with as well and fits into that kind of 50%. When you then look at the injuries, and this matches up with the SOVs taking a much bigger prevalence in the database for 2023 than they did before, is that what we're seeing is people living aboard and spending a lot more time offshore than they were before. So that 13% in the darker blue of first aid injuries and the medical treatment cases in the pink, they tend to be slip, trips, and falls of people walking from accommodation to mess and rest areas to toilets. They are kind of sharp injuries from the kitchens and caterings, so it's just the fact that we are existing offshore a lot more than we perhaps were before. And I'll just mention the near misses, which is that kind of 30% orange slice, and depending on whether it's a near miss for an injury or a near miss for an asset damage, kind of they'll fall into one of the two patterns I just talked about. If I look at the restricted work days and lost work day cases, then we start seeing things that are perhaps more operational in the sense that we have manual handling type injuries relating to kind of either pure manual handling tasks or some lifting operations. We see slips, trips, and falls kind of in other scenarios, and kind of, again, some sharp injuries or sharp blades related injuries outside of that catering kitchen scenario. But again, we're talking 1% of the entire pie kind of in that space. So if I draw your attention then to the three smaller pie charts in the middle of this dashboard, the middle one of those is high potentials, and the dark blue means no, the light blue means yes. So in all of this, we have only had 8% of these vessel operation incidents as high potentials reported for 2023, none requiring emergency response. And that starts to shift our story a little bit, because when we consider high potentials, and this particular dashboard has filtered everything to just look at high potential incidents, then we're not seeing we didn't see in 2023 the increase that we saw in overall number of incidents. In fact, we saw a decrease for 2023 and a pretty much very minor or flat rise compared to the 5-year average. So so it feels very much that we're an industry that is existing further offshore and spending more time offshore than we perhaps were a couple of years ago. But before I hand you over to Miriam to talk about data in a perhaps more insightful way, I'll just draw your attention to the bar charts going down on the left-hand side. So again, I did a similar thing where I clicked vessel operations so that the other two charts would adjust and just show me the trends for that. Vessel operations in the third position in the kind of top 10 of incidents per high potentials, but above it is transfer. And this is a pattern that is historically true. So transfer incidents, if I was showing you all incidents, it would be at the bottom of the top 10. So in 7th, 8th position, usually every year. Once you then select for high potentials only, it rises up that ranking. And this is, as I said, this is true historically, and it was even more so in 2023. Particularly when we looked at construction, where 32% of transfer incidents for construction sites were high potentials. That is a very high proportion of high potentials compared to other incident types, and some of that related to walk to work. And I will not get into it because Reese will talk about it, but this is why you can see why we've built this webinar around the things that we have. So yeah, without anything else, I'll hand over to Miriam to, as I said, talk more about data and different ways of seeing things.
Thank you, Mariana. I'm just trying to share my screen. Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you, and thanks for lining me up. I hope the expectation has not been set too high. So I'm here today to talk about serious injuries and fatalities prevention, right? So before I joined Seaway 7, I'm new to the wind industry. I'm new to the offshore wind industry. And before joining Seaway 7, I was a SME and principal consultant for the prevention of serious injuries and fatalities in the workplace. And I worked in very different and various industries, from mining to aviation to construction. So a very varied experience. So I'd like to talk about this methodology that offers a really different perspective, a different way of looking at data. So I do hope that you find this insightful. So for anybody who's worked in safety before, anybody who's got experience in safety, you will have heard of the Heinrich triangle. And the Heinrich triangle is a very helpful theory that's quite old now, but still valid today from a statistical perspective. So that's where it's helpful. It's a theory that suggests that for every 300 near misses, you have around 29 injuries and 1 fatality. And statistically, this is correct, right? Statistically, this is accepted to be correct. So for a very long time, this theory was seen as the gold standard of safety. When I say statistically is correct, so if we compared with a company X, and this is a fictitious company, but if we compared some data and we thought, okay, well, at the bottom of our pyramid, we have 30 near misses and we have 29 injuries and 0 fatalities. Statistically, I can safely conclude that I'm underreporting. We're seeing that there's a lack of reporting when it comes to near misses. So from a statistical perspective, that is a safe assumption to make. Here's the limitation, though, because the whole idea with this concept was, okay, so we need to act at the bottom of the pyramid then, because if we start tackling our 300 near misses and then we don't have 300 near misses, that means that we cannot possibly have 29 injuries, and therefore we cannot have 1 fatality. So that makes a lot of logical sense, but that's not how it works. It doesn't work like that because not all near misses are equal. So from a predictability perspective, this is where this theory fails, and we need to think beyond that, right? So it's helpful in some respect, but it has its limitation. Let me just demonstrate that a little bit further. So if we looked at general industries, right? So this is not offshore, this is not offshore wind, this is general industries, and the data is from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. But what we are seeing is a very global trend, and you'll probably recognize this trend. There's a nice downward trend when it comes to recordable injuries. So we're seeing less and less recordable injuries. We're hurting less people at work, and that's a great thing. So thinking back of the theory that we've just seen, Heinrich's theory, if we are seeing less injuries, then we should be seeing less fatalities. So this red curve that we're about to see should also be going down, but that's not what we're seeing. Actually, this red line is a plateau. And this is a real paradox because it doesn't make sense. Because what we're looking at here, what we're saying is that on the one hand, we're getting really better at reducing injuries in the workplace. So how is it that whilst we're getting better at reducing injuries, we have zero impact on fatalities? How is that possible? What are we missing? What is it that we're not seeing? This is a real paradox, right? So looking at our own statistics and having taken the same numbers from IMCA, we do recognize that we see a similar downward trend when it comes to the TRIR. So looking at it from a linear perspective, very clearly, we can see that it's going down. And looking at the fatality rate over the past few years, well, it's a little bit sporadic, so it's not really helpful to look at it that way. But from a linear perspective, it's actually worse. It's getting worse. It's not even a plateau. It's an upward trend. So this is a real paradox, right? Thinking about this logically, it makes no sense unless we're really missing something. There's something that we're not seeing. So well, the invite here is to think about things differently. I often like to use Albert Einstein's definition of insanity. Well, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. Maybe it's time to think about things differently and think, okay, well, we are missing something, and we need to think about this in a very different way. So clearly, acting at the bottom of the pyramid is an outdated mode of thinking. As I said, not all near misses are equal. So we need to start distinguishing those near misses that actually do contain the potential for a serious injury or a fatality. Some near misses have that potential, and some near misses, some occurrences don't. But it's not just about near misses. It's also injuries, right? So acting all across the pyramid is important. Understanding all of the data is important, but making the difference between those events that have potential to be a serious injury or a fatality and those events that don't, that's crucial. Because if you want to have a strategy that reduces your serious injuries and your fatalities, then working outside of this red triangle, so working outside of this potential, let's say, triangle, is not going to have an impact on your red line. So the SIF approach then, well, what is it? It's a very simple approach, if you like, and it's based on 3 questions. So it's trying to answer 3 questions. And the first question is, well, is it possible for me? Can I quantify the potential for the SIF risk in my organization? Is it possible for me to know how big the problem is? And if the answer is yes, then can I know specifically what risk our people face every day? So the first question is quantitative. The second question is qualitative. Is it possible for me to know how big the problem is? Do I know specifically what the problem is? And of course, and very logically, the third question is, well, what are we going to do about it then, right? If I know that. Very often in my past experience, when I spoke to organizations about fatalities in the workplace, fatalities are spoken as if they were some kind of a mysterious monster. Right? A mysterious monster that is going to come and take someone, and we don't know when, we don't know how, we don't know where, we just know it's going to happen and we can't help it. And that's indeed very scary. So this approach tries to demystify that. So if I take the analogy of the monster, then if I know how big the monster is, and if I know, if I can put a face and a name to that monster, I know what that monster is, only then can I fight that monster, right? So I often use this analogy because it makes a lot of sense. Now this sounds really easy, right? 3 questions, 1, 2, 3. It's actually not that simple. And the first hurdle we might face as an industry, as an organization, is that, well, is the first question, quantifying that potential risk. The first thing you'll notice when you start comparing data between organizations is that we have different definitions, and we don't always agree on the definitions. And therefore, we end up comparing things thinking, oh, okay, well, I see a trend there. Actually, are we really sure? Because are we comparing apples and apples? So the first thing we need to do in order to quantify the potential for risk is to measure it, to be able to measure it. And in order to measure it, we need to be able to define it. And that's really not that easy. So it takes a real collective effort to try and come up with a definition. And the key is to really calibrate on that definition. Be absolutely certain that we have an understanding, we all understand this definition, and we are calibrated on this definition. I wanted to share further insights from the research I have done in the past in this topic. So some research, some SIF interesting questions. What does research tell us? Well, interestingly, and maybe this will not surprise most of you, I know that the first time I saw that, I was surprised. 81% of injuries and fatalities occur during routine work. Okay, 81% of SIF happens during routine work. Now, of course, this on the one hand tells us that people somehow get, I hear all sorts of words like complacent, and they get into routine work, they get too comfortable, a little bit arrogant. That's the easy conclusion to take out of this statistic. Now, here's a much harder one to look at. 81% of serious injuries and fatalities occur during routine work. That means that we've started introducing, as organizations, right? As an organization, we've started introducing a hell of a lot of SIF risk into routine work. Now, that's much harder to take in. We've introduced a lot of SIF risk into routine work. We're asking our people to do some seriously risky stuff. So the invitation here is to think how many of our corrective actions rely on humans to control risk, right? Understanding hub principles, and the first one of that, as Ian was referring to earlier, human organizational performance. Humans make errors. People will make errors. So have a look at your corrective actions and think about this. How many of them rely on people to control the risk? Because that will make the difference between, are you just waiting for if something goes wrong or when something goes wrong? It's a matter of time, because people do make mistakes. Another interesting statistic is that 42% of serious injuries and fatalities are linked to life-saving rules. So 42% of serious injuries and fatalities are linked to life-saving rules. This number is surprising for two very opposite reasons. The first one is, and the first thing that struck me when I saw this number, I thought, wow, that's really high. In the sense that if we have a life-saving rule, well, it's meant to do just that. It's meant to save someone's life. So how can we have 42% still linked to life-saving rules? Do we really mean what we say? You know, have we really got some, are we serious about consequence management when it comes to these life-saving rules? Do we really understand what we're asking our people to do when we come up with these life-saving rules? And that's a really important one. One of the things I'd like to say on this is people don't violate life-saving rules because it's fun, right? They don't come to work thinking, oh, you know what, today I'm going to do this. They violate life-saving rules because it's sometimes the only way they have to do something, to perform their duties, right? So as an organization, we put people in situations where they routinely have to violate life-saving rules. That's more difficult to accept. Now, the other reason why this statistic is surprising is very low. Let me explain. I said it's very high, 42%, and I explained my reason. In another sense, it's very low, meaning that if our life-saving rules were meant to represent the SIF risk in our organization, then it should be 100%, right? So what are we missing? So the question here is, are our life-saving rules really relevant? You know, are our life-saving rules really addressing our SIF risk profile as an organization or as an industry? Or did we just take something, you know, why 10 is the question I often ask. Why 10? Is it that easy to remember 10? Sometimes, and I'm not saying that this is the case here, but sometimes it's better to have 4 or 5, but really understand them, really understand what we're asking of our people, and really be strong on consequence management. By the way, consequence management could be saying, well done for doing it right? So it could be a positive consequence as well. Finally, 29 of serious injuries and fatalities may have been prevented with an adequate toolbox talk. So again, the ask here is, are we sure that we're addressing the right topics during our toolbox talk? How well are we doing that? How well are we fully understanding the picture? Because remember, the graph we just saw shows us that we're missing something. So what are we missing? What are we not seeing? So these are really interesting questions, but of course you will hear different theories, different ideas, different new, fresh perspectives. And at first it's very interesting and we all think, oh, wow, this is really interesting. But then we think a little bit and the so what is so important. So we come to a point where I say, okay, that's nice. So what? What does this actually mean? You know, what are we going to do about it, right? So the next steps. Well, I mentioned it before, but it's very much about collaboration, calibration, understanding, being on the same page, understanding that we're talking the same language, because otherwise we're miscommunicating. So yes, it takes a collective effort, and that's hard work, right? That's difficult. It's easy to say it like this, but actually it's very, very difficult to achieve. And as leaders, well, what can you do differently? Right? Because this is a very important question. Okay, knowing what we know, what can we do differently? Leader sponsorship is crucial to safe prevention. It's not just important, it's absolutely critical. And how you react matters. What you say, how you behave matters. What you say matters. Showing curiosity, daring to challenge your own beliefs, because that's also very difficult, right? Especially for people that have been in this industry for 10, 15, 20 years, 25 years. You think, well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, dare to challenge what you believe. Ask questions and refrain from making assumptions. So this is really my takeaway and the message that I wanted to reinforce during this presentation. Thank you very much, and I hope that you have found this talk interesting. And on this note, I will hand over to Reese.
Good morning, and hope everyone's well. It's always strange when you can't actually see the people you're speaking to directly. Just to pick up from something Miriam said there, and I think it's really important, is that actually, yes, you know, most of our incidents come from human mistakes, that people are human. Mistakes don't make that individual a bad person or a bad employee. It only takes an argument in the car with the kids on the way to work, or to be worrying about something while you're sitting on that vessel that's going on back home, for you to be more distracted than usual, even for a very diligent individual most of the time. So just keeping that humanity in our thoughts when we're considering this is very important. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to start just talking you through the context, background, and plans for IMCA's joint Walk to Work Safety and Performance Improvement Programme, and how we've been working with G+ and other stakeholders on this. So if we can just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. And the next one. So this really started for us as a consideration in the autumn of 2023, and that's when we started to see ourselves, G+ were approached, OE UK were also approached by the regulator in the UK, the Health and Safety Executive, with concerns around walk to work systems. They had a number of concerns on this. Some of them came out of previous incidents that they'd seen. They had a major concern about entrapment. They had a major concern about operators and essentially future technology, and how we were looking at it as an organization, how we were looking at it as a sector. They didn't really have a huge number of figures to go with this, and part of that comes to something we'll talk about at the end, which is some of our baseline figures and reporting for this. But they were seeing what they thought was an uptake. OE UK, G Plus and others felt this was very much a marine issue, and therefore it was something for IMCA to lead on. And I think we'd certainly have agreed with that at the time and still do. We'd already published guidance on this, and that's IMCA M254 guidance on walk-to-work systems and operations in 2021 by my predecessor, Andy Goldsmith. And, you know, that had proved fairly successful, and, you know, as we'll come on to, that's a very robust piece of guidance. We were also seeing concerns coming from other regulators around the world, notably, you know, conversations that we had in the US with Bessie, and sort of some of the stuff we're hearing from, you know, new colleagues coming through into the offshore infrastructure regulator, the OIR, in Australia. And then, you know, as part of our usual member engagement piece, we're certainly hearing these sorts of concerns from our members around the world, and notably conversations held in Taiwan with members and developers there, and the same with our US operations. So it was certainly becoming an issue, and it's something that we wanted to talk with our colleagues about and our stakeholders. So if we can just go to the next slide. So just talk about a couple of examples here. Now, these are safety flashes, so I'm not going to go into them in vast amounts of detail, because I think we'll be here all day if I do that. But one of the key things we saw was 2 incidents that came up. Now, before I go into these, what I would say is the Health and Safety Executive in the UK were very, very clear about something, which is particularly on one of these incidents, which, you know, will be known to some of you, I'm sure. They were incredibly complimentary about the response, reaction, and actions that have been taken as a result by the organisations involved. In fact, they were holding that up as a really good example of good practice, best practices in terms of responding post-incident. So if you know who I'm talking about as I go through this, and I will do this anonymously, it is really important to note that they were very positive about the responses. So the first one you can see there on the left, and you know, it's not the clearest picture, I do apologize, but this is a walk-to-work gangway system that broke loose from its connection point. This occurred during transfer of 4 personnel onto an offshore wind installation, and the first individual received a green light, operated manually to transfer across, and did so without any problems whatsoever. After that person had transferred, the system moved laterally and slipped upwards from its push-on point and came into contact with the floor grating. That came loose, resulting in minor damage. The transfer was aborted, and further transfers were done via CTV. Now, when this was looked at, the causes here, investigation of the software control for the gangway system, active motion compensation, really showed that the performance for boom motion was not optimal. Corrections were made to that software program. The primary cause was found to be due to the reduced accuracy of that system and the vertical force acting on the connection point, leading to that connection failure. And the results from that, the lessons learned that we took as an industry, were around the system, the active motion compensation system performance required verification during annual inspection. Before connecting to the gangway, position a gangway approximately 1 meter from the connection point, and visually being verified that that system is stable and that control error is within those reasonable limits. And that verifying the connection point is designed to fit the gangway with respect to shape and load. So again, this comes back to our push-on points and others. So we can see there that this is very much a systemic issue with this example. Second example, probably more concerning for us, was one of a crewman, and you can see the boot there, getting their feet trapped under the sliding step of a motion compensated telescopic gangway section. The incident did occur during the hours of darkness, so that's quite key to what you're going to hear over the next few moments, when they were using that gangway to transfer to a normally unmanned installation again. The individual did suffer serious but not life-threatening injuries, and that would have been recorded as a lost time injury. And the emergency response plan was activated at that point, including medevac to the local hospital or the nearest hospital. No specific design criteria for the gap between the sliding step and fixed part of the gangway was obvious, nor was there an absolute norm for the monitoring of that gap. So this was something that the regulators focused in on quite significantly, and they saw that as a major issue. There's also insufficient lighting on the gangway, bearing in mind this was in darkness, and that resulted in a lack of awareness of the location and movement and speed of movement of that sliding moving part. And the gangway induction video, and this is something I'm going to be talking about a bit later, didn't really generate sufficient awareness regarding that potential hazard and other areas. So what did we learn from that one? That more rigorous standards, controls and checks were required, particularly for dealing with the risks associated with moving parts, and that the sliding step was well marked, but the markings weren't clearly visible in that type of light, and better lighting was required if we were going to do that in those sorts of times of day. So these are the sorts of incidents that were concerning both our members and the regulators for fairly obvious reasons. If we can move to the next slide, please. And the next one, thank you. So what are we going to do about this as an industry? Well, the first thing we did was talk to our colleagues here at G+, and the upshot of that was on the 9th of April 2024, a joint workshop was held in London, hosted by the G+. And really that was quite a good start for us. Now, that was well attended by operators, developers, primary contractors, as well as OEMs and other essential stakeholders that we needed in the room. I won't go through the full list, no point in reading a list of names, but you know, all of our major members and certainly all of G+'s major members were in the room for that one, along with significant others. So that was really the start of this one. Now, if we can just go to the next slide, please. Okay, so there were some 14 recommendations came out of this, the report out of this one. Again, you know, some of them were pretty key. You know, the first one up that is really probably important here is that there should be greater ownership of the end-to-end safety management for walk-to-work applications, including that walk-to-work equipment vessel interface with the structure, procedures, maintenance, training, emergency response. So you can see it covers the whole scope of our operations and assurance activities. Now, I'll come back to assurance activities at the end as well, which collectively provide an acceptable safety level. We can keep going through these, but there are ones that you'll see, and they do relate to some of the changes that we are looking to make over the next few years. Things like the overarching training requirements for designers, vessel captains, walk-to-work operators, and importantly, users should be reviewed and an industry training standard and framework developed. These should include emergency operations and simulations. Human factors expertise should be engaged to support design processes, operational decision-making, compliance procedures, etc. So there are a significant number of them, and I would recommend reading the report on this workshop that was published by the G+ following that, because it will give you some in-depth ideas of who it was. But really the important thing here is it shared out responsibility for those actions between three main areas. That's IMCA ourselves, that's the G+ in terms of its membership, and also what developers and owners need to do individually. I think there was one recommendation from the top of my head that related to OEMs and vessel owners, but out of the 14, there was only one. So we can see that this is something that really required collective action from the industry here. And I think that's the key point we take away from this. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So the other thing that became very, very clear to us as IMCA, and bearing in mind that we work globally with a number of different sectors, is that this wasn't just a wind issue. This isn't just for offshore wind. This is very relevant for some of our oil and gas members, particularly in Brunei as well. And that any solution or guidance that we put out needed to be equally applicable for that sector. Now, what that results in the long term may be that we do see some slight divergence in how we apply some of these principles, particularly when we come on to future technologies. But generally, the goal-setting approach that we should have should be applicable across both sectors. So when you see what we've done and what we're planning to do, you will see us including oil and gas into this and factored into this much more significantly than maybe a more European focused mindset would expect. So just please bear that in mind. And next slide, please. So how did we engage? Well, you can see there a number of places that we held workshops. This wasn't just about talking to that G+ workshop and taking it on. In fact, our very first workshop and engagement with our membership happened before that in March of 2024 at our North American regional. That was held in Newport, Rhode Island, with a lot of our members coming up from the, I was going to say Gulf of Mexico, but maybe I need to call that Gulf of America now, but certainly the Houston area, and joining us up there. So again, this was multi-sector, and that was our first workshop. We also have workshopped this and talked about this in other places, particularly notably Taipei with our members in the Taiwanese wind sector. It was broached at our Asia Pacific regionals, both in Kuala Lumpur in March of 2024 and in Singapore in October of 2024, as well as our DP conference. And I'll come on to why the DP conference was important a little bit later on. And that was in May of 2024. It was also invited to speak and then be involved in an event that Ampelman held in the autumn last year up in Hamburg. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to make this global. We've tried to involve as many of our members as we possibly can and get them to input into this particular process. So if we can move on to the next slide. The working group that came out of the IMCA Marine Renewable Energy Committee was fairly broad. It expanded out as we were working, but what you can see there is we've got a good mix of operators, developers, OEMs, and also vessel operators and contractors. The idea behind this was we needed as many of the OEMs involved as we possibly could. There are still some who've come on board very late in the process, shall we say, since we've actually concluded this, and have had further comments, and we expect them to be included in the phase 2 of this. But these were the core group that worked on it, and this was overseen by our Renewable Energy Committee as well. Next slide, please. Now, what we've done at IMCA is take a phased approach. So the first phase for last year and ending about now was for us to take the IMCA guidance, that's M254, revise that in consultation with our membership, and that will be ratified in the next 2 weeks by the Marine Renewable Energy Committee at its meeting next week, and we will put that out. So that was the first phase. The other thing that came out of that, as you'll see in a minute, is a number of other issues, which leads us on to the phase 2, which will be 2025 to 2026. And the idea is to explore that the issues that were brought up in that first revision and that first set of discussions and the workshops that maybe sit outside the scope of the guidance document itself, how we can take those forward, how we can improve them, how we can implement those. And then moving on to phase 3, once that's complete, which was slated for 2026 to 2027, is for us to then implement those, revisit the guidance document and add them into that. So that's really what we're trying to achieve here. If we can just move on to the next slide. So like I say, phase 1 was a revision of IMCA 254, and that will be out for publication in the next few weeks. But it also identifies other opportunities for improvement. And again, we'll sort of go on to those later on in this presentation. But it also identifies the stakeholders who are best placed to assist with us, who may not have been involved with the initial phase. So when we start talking about training and competence, we may be talking about directly involving the training accreditation bodies and others. So you'll see who those are broadly in a few moments. And the next slide, please. So phase 2, this is really crucial because this is what we're going into, and this is where I'm going to be asking those who are listening here, and I don't know who you are, but please do get in touch with us for your help, because what we do is we go into this second phase. Now, what I've put up here is some of the highlights. It's not limited to this, but the areas we'll be exploring are competence, and this is an important one. So there are 3 areas of competence that were identified very clearly. The first was users. So one of the things you heard in that case study a few moments ago was around training. The other thing is we don't have a good idea of how many transfers are done per year in this industry. Now, individually, some of your companies may know how many transfers you do, but if I come to the sector and say, how many transfers have we done as an industry, I can't get an answer. I haven't been able to get an answer, and that is a problem because it doesn't give us a baseline. So what you see on the right-hand side there at the bottom is statistics. Do we require data on the number of transfers made to provide a baseline figure for incident frequency? So that's going to be something we explore. Well, how do we do that? Well, one of the things is, do we need some form of incident reporting system? So in our systems, we have an incident reporting system for dynamic positioning incidents. And one of the things we'll be exploring in the next year is, do we need some similar reporting system for walk to work? And how would that look? What would that mean? What are the implications? So it's important to say that all these are open questions. They're questions we're asking. They're not predestined pieces of work that we will be implementing, but it's something we'll be exploring. And that again feeds in, because if we know the incident baseline, that informs the training and the requirements that we have. And like I said, there are 3 areas of competence we need to look at. Users. It is passing strange to me that when we increasingly use walk to work systems, we spend a lot of time when we do our GWO training for this industry talking about CTV training. Up until recently, there's been no discussion of walk to work training. That's being left to the individual duty holders, vessel owners, project managers to sort of work on. GWO are looking at this. It's important to say that they've acknowledged that. They're starting to look at it. They're starting to think about that, and we're in discussions with them on that. I think any more detail on that is for them to talk about, not for me. But I think, we are moving in a positive direction there, and we would expect that to be added in. What it looks like, I don't know. Whether that will be part of the BST or whether it will be a bolt-on will be up to them to decide, and it's something we'll certainly support them with. You'll also see under there is a PITO, and that comes back to that multi-sector approach that I was talking about before. This is also an issue for oil and gas, and therefore we need to consider it where a PITO comes in, where whether similar training needs to be equivalent for BOSIAT, FOIT training for that side of things. And the one thing I've made very clear to both organisations is whatever training we come up with should be mutually recognised and mutually transferable. I think it's really important that if people, and we support that transferability and lack of friction between sectors on this. So what I would like to see is that we can recognise both pieces of training without actually having bolt-ons or additional ones, bar the very specific project requirements. The one that IMCA will get involved with very heavily is operator training and others. So we do need to make sure that we, apologies. So we do need to make sure that we have that going on, and we need to understand what that means. And that comes back to this piece on the right with operator CPD. Just 1 second. Apologies, terrible timing. The dog has decided to shout at the postman. So my apologies to you all for that one. So the operator CPD logs. So, if we're going to train our operators and require some form of standardized training across, how do we do that? How do we make sure we don't duplicate? How do we make sure that they are getting training that can be transferred within reason? And how do we log what they've done? Well, the operators need to understand that. So do we need a CPD system? Do we need logbooks similar to those that we have with crane operators and others? So that's really key to what we're trying to achieve. Again, it's an open question. It's controversial in some areas and something we need to consider. Other things that have been flagged that we might need to think about is client competence. So this is the one that maybe will be slightly more controversial to the room, which is we've seen that regulators will go to the duty holder, the project owner in the first instance. And as we all know, that question is, how did you ascertain that what you were doing is safe? And I simplify that as best I can. Well, the second question is, how did the person who made that decision, how did you ascertain that person was the correct person to do it? We've got some excellent people amongst the developers and operators who know very much what they are doing in this area, but do we have enough of them to cover the global operations that we have, or do we have one individual sitting centrally who's being pulled in a dozen different directions? And I think that's going to be the key. So how do we support developers and operators to make good decisions around working with their contractors on the systems that they use, on the contractors that they use, and making sure that they fully understand what's going on? That doesn't mean we have an issue. So other than that, the other things we've got here are whether we need to look at telescopic speeds, software updates, and floating offshore wind. So how do we make sure that we don't make the mistakes we've done in the past with fixed wind, where we don't necessarily have, how can I put it, standardization on things like push-on points and gates and these sorts of things? How can we make it as easy as possible? So that's what phase 2 looks like. There will be other things in there as well. Next slide, please. Phase 3, hopefully, I was going to say it's very simple. It won't be simple at all, but at this point in time, what this would be is a revision of IMCA 254 again for its third revision, but taking into account all the other things that we've spoken about there and the progress we've made in those areas. And again, we'd be looking for your support and input into that. And can we move on to the next slide, please? And the next one, like I say, is questions. The other thing I would say very briefly is one of the things that came out of the G+ report and that workshop we talked about right at the beginning was a point that actually, had people been following the IMCA guidance, the chances of those incidents occurring would have been much lower. So there's two things there. One is, how do we make sure the industry picks up on the guidance, because the guidance we already have is very robust, it's very suitable, it does its job. And second is, how do we as IMCA make sure that you have access to that and understand what it is? So those are the questions I would ask you to come back to us with comments on. But thank you for your time, and I will now hand on to Hendrik. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. I will talk a bit about vessel requirements assurance in an expanding market from a developer and operator point of view. Next slide, please. So we will have a look into vessel requirements, what we set up as RWE, have a look how RWE is performing the assurance process, and what we found out on vessel inspection, give you also a bit of practical informations and samples. And then we will have also a look into uncrewed surface vessels, which is a good alternative and an opportunity for us as an industry. If you could go to the next slide, please. So when I speak about requirements, these are requirements in general for RWE, from development going into construction, going into O&M, as well as decommissioning. When I talk about specific examples, I have to say those come from the development and construction phase, because I was involved in those areas only and not in the operation phase. So what we have established within RWE is so-called marine governance system. The marine governance system is you can say it's a management system which defines how we procure a vessel, what vessel requirements we have, how a vessel is going through the assurance process, a standardized process, get the approval, and how the vessel works in the execution phase. So we have minimum vessel requirements, which are set up for a small survey boat, which is 10 meters long, up to a big construction vessel, which is 200 plus meters and everything in between. Those standards requirements are applicable on a global stage. And if we have then specific vessel types like a CTV, a tug, anchor handlers, work-to-work vessels, and so on, we have additional documents, additional requirements to our minimum vessel requirements. Of course, applying this global standard globally is challenging. So we have the European market, and I compared it in this sample to the APEC region, but a lot of topics could be also transferred to the US. So in Europe, we have a quite established offshore wind market due to a long history already working with offshore wind. We have an established supply chain, which either established itself from the offshore wind market or from a maritime shipping industry, as well as oil and gas. So more or less, you know which asset you have available in Europe, and also how much time you need for the vessel assurance process. Later on in the presentation, I will show you a bit the statistics, how much time we need for vessel assurance comparing Europe, US, and APEC. In APEC, looking at offshore wind, the supply chain on the vessels, it's not so mature as in Europe. They have oil and gas as well, but in the areas we are working in, the offshore sector is not that built up yet. Speaking about South Korea, for example, or Japan. And also not all vessel types are available, which you need for your operation, development, construction, as well as O&M later on. Then you have, in some countries, local content as well. So you need to use local supply chain, local vessels. This could mean we will look into a sample of a fishing vessel later on, which you need to use as a guard vessel in Japan, for example. Or during site investigation, we needed to use a Japanese flagged vessel. There was none available. So our supplier took a vessel, brought it into Japan, reflagged it. So you need a lot of lead time until you actually conduct your work. If you come in with a foreign flagged vessel, for example, there are certain requirements. You're not allowed to do crew change in port. So either you have to go out of the 12-mile zone, do the crew transfer with a CTV. What we saw on Mariana's slides, that vessel-to-vessel transfer, it's a risk and high potential risk. Or what we did then, sailing over from Japan to Korea, for example, to do the crew change. So there are a lot of challenges. Also, the industry G+ guidance or IMCA guidelines are not that well known and or also implemented. So meaning that we as a developer, operator, we also need to educate the supply chain in order to make them aware about the guidelines and how to apply them to their operations. All this is kind of vessel assurance, but also project preparation, and this, it's very unpredictable how much time you need. And then it's also very challenging if you need a vessel on very short notice to conduct whatever work, because you need quite a lot of time to go with the vessel through the assurance process. This is the assurance process, what we established as well in other years, documents or requirements how vessels should operate within our wind farms, meaning we have a DP requirement standards, or how to do marine transfers, either import via gangway to the vessel, but also basket transfers, offshore gangway transfers, and so on. And this all is backed up by G+ and or IMCA guidelines. Next, please. Okay. Speaking about assurance, how we get a vessel through the assurance. Basically, we have a 3-stage standardized approach. First of all, we have a technical suitability assessment. So the project will check the vessel if it's suitable for the project, and the marine expert is looking if the vessel is marine suitable, if it's the right platform to conduct the task in the environment and area the work shall be conducted. If this is ticked with a yes from both parties, we will go into the next step, which is the desktop study or desktop audit. So we have a standardized, quite long checklist, I would say, because our aim is already to check a lot of documentation up front before we even go on the vessel. Because from our point of view, it's not time efficient to check all the vessel certificates on board of the vessel or have a deep look into the DP operation manuals when on board the vessel. This can be done already upfront. You have more time upfront than on the vessel, and you can concentrate on the vessel itself on more specific areas or even pick up topics which you question during your desktop study. Then we are doing the vessel inspection, and if all those 3 steps are ticked off, then the vessel gets an approval and it's allowed on our side. If you could go to the next slide, please. As said, we are doing the desktop study a bit more in detail, just to have more time on board the vessel to look into the equipment, on the safe management on the vessel. So we established a standardized checklist, which is again applicable across the globe from development, construction, O&M, decommissioning. So we will have a look into first all the vessel certification, then some additional information like a CMID or a marine inspection for small workboats, depending on the size of the vessel. We will have a look into the port state control reports. We have a look into the manning and crew competence matrix. Then we want that the supplier is also defining their weather limits for each individual step of the operation and also defining when weather window. Having a look, then it's again vessel specific. If it's a DP vessel, checkup vessel, if the vessel has a helicopter deck, there are additional sections to the main ones. Key findings from desktop studies, often we have that suppliers are not so familiarized with weather limits and weather windows, how to define that one, so we have to educate them as well. And the findings now are across the globe. This is not on a specific region. And during, for example, site investigation campaigns, we often also utilize checkup vessels which are towed by a tug. And this needs quite a long time during the assurance process to get the tow plan approved. This is based on several facts that certification for towing equipment is not delivered on time. Certificates from towing equipment are expired. We have questions about the safe havens, the route, how the method statement of connecting the tug, conducting the tow, disconnecting. So it's a quite long process, even within Europe, where you might assume that towing is for a lot of companies day-to-day business. And what we recognized also, and this is also applicable for the North Sea, I was a bit astonished, a lack of DP documentation. This goes from the DP operational manual, which is outdated, meaning the vessel, we found out that on the last FMEA, there were different DP system equipment modified, and this is not feeded back into the DP operational manual, or it's 20 years old, the DP manual, and the owner changed several times, and just the vessel name was updated, but all the company philosophy on the DP manual does not match with the actual safety management system of the current operator. Meaning also that references to IMCA documents are outdated, or often what we see that DP manual is not even set up to the recommendation of IMCA. And this leads us also to have a more strict DP requirement standard within our marine governance system in order to submit to the suppliers what our expectations are to follow IMCA guidelines. But also what we see is that there's a lack sometimes on the FMEAs. Either we will receive draft reports which are not finalized, information is missing on the FMEAs. Also, we require that an FMEA is based on IMCA, so it's not a class report, which is a very, very short report comparing it to the IMCA standard. So DP vessels within our operation shall have an FMEA which is based on the IMCA requirements. And that said, there are a lot of discussion often with owners and managers which does not have updated DP documentation, because we are often approached, yeah, nobody was picking it up except you. It was not picked up by the DP assessor. It was not picked up by former clients. But this shows us that as a whole industry, we need to look more into those topics, into the documentation. And DP is just a good example for it when it comes to marine operations. Next slide, please. What I said a few slides before, so we did some analyze how much time we actually need for vessel assurance. And this is, as said, this is based on development and construction only, but we compared it for Europe, APEC, and US. This is based only on desktop study, and this could be a vessel 10-meter small survey boat, which you need for bird survey, up to a site investigation vessel, which doing drilling campaigns. But you clearly see that on average, we need a bit more than 5 hours to get a vessel through the desktop study in Europe. We double the time going into US, and yeah, way over 20 hours we need in APEC. That could be due to several reasons. Either documentation are not submitted as requested in APEC. It could be what I said also, that IMCA guidelines, G+ guidelines are not known. If you look on a DP vessel, then the DP documentation is lacking. So there's a lot of discussion going on all the time, or also question about the CMID reports on the findings, or if we spot something else on the description and pictures. So a lot of action trackers being sent back and forth all the time. So this leads to more time in the APEC region, and also sometimes language barriers when we do the desktop study in APEC area. Next slide, please. A key element for RWE is that we inspect the vessels, even if we had a CMID or marine inspection for small workboats conducted by an accredited vessel inspector, is that we step on board ourselves. Especially in the emerging market, so in APEC, we will go on board every vessel, nevertheless, how small or big the vessel is and what task it will conduct. Also for this one, we established a standardized checklist, which is based on our vessel requirements. So it's not a copy-paste from CMID. Of course, there might be some overlaps, but especially we concentrate on our RWE requirements on the vessels and check them against our standardized checklist. So we established a standardized vessel inspection checklist for all sorts of vessels, and then also having, again, specified chapters about DP towing, depending what the vessel scope is, as well as uncrewed surface vessels coming more into the market and will be used more frequently. So we standardize this checklist as well. And from time to time, we use also transport barges, and we established a checklist as well. If you could go to the next slide, please. Those are some examples from emerging markets. So the challenge is the vessels which are available, the state of the equipment, and the safety management of the particular vessel. If we see the picture on top, that's a fishing vessel, which we had to use based on national legislation in Japan for guard duties, so there was no way around. There was a fishing association, and we had to use them for guard vessel duties. Clearly, if you would read our RWE requirements, and I guess that's for all developers across the board, this vessel would fail the inspection regime. But what our approach is, we will go on board, have a look on the vessel, and then educate the crew, as well as bringing on extra safety equipment. So this could be supplying them with immersion suits, inflatable life jackets, life rafts, whatever it's missing, just to make the operation as safe as possible. Going to the bottom right picture, so this was also in the APEC region, a vessel which should be used for pushing into a boat landing to go on a mat mast. Clearly you see the fender arrangement is completely different to the ones we used to know in Europe, but unfortunately often that's what suppliers are coming up with. And then you have the challenge to explain them G+ guidance, IMCA guidance, how a fender setup should look like, because the mat mast had a, let's call it, European boat landing design. And also explaining what the risks are using that vessels. It's not only educating the supply chain, but also educating your own employees at the same time, because you're in an emerging market and the knowledge is not in that market available, so you have to transfer the knowledge all the time. The last two pictures, there we stopped the job actually. What was also said by Miriam within her presentation, because of a high potential that this operation was not safe. So this was also again in the APEC region, and this setup with barge and the tug was proposed to deploy flighter buoys for mid-ocean data collection. What you see on the pictures is that the towing arrangement, a towing bridle, was made out of ropes spliced by the crew, and that's not safe because of the friction between the rope. Easily the ropes can be parted, and also it was not connected via Smith brackets and chain to the barge, but also only put the rope on top of a bollard. Additionally, the towing rope could not be shortened or lengthened by a towing winch. It was just put on a towing hook. And I went on the tug, and over there I saw the tow line, which was not in a good state. The splice from the crew was very loose, so you could put your fist between the splice, and the crew was not even aware about the emergency release on the tow hook, and this was completely painted. So again, making the point that it's quite important to go on board the vessels by yourself, by the company, checking that all your company requirements are in place. And if not, I know that's commercially very challenging, stop the job and search for an alternative, which we did on this occasion. Next slide, please. And then last but not least, just talking a bit about uncrewed surface vessels, because it's what we did in RWE. We had a US strategy project. We had a look into what is an uncrewed surface vessel, where can we use it, what is the best use cases, and how does this compare to traditional vessels? Because we saw it's a new technology, but basically it is for offshore wind only. The technology is there already for a couple of years. So we shared this knowledge we gained during the USV strategy project within the company. We saw there's big potential to use USV for different work scopes, being it bathymetry surveys at the moment, but also bigger USV will come. As you see on the picture, that's an example from Excel. So the smaller unit, it's a DRIX H8, which has great weather capabilities and will outperform a traditional survey vessel. If you do your math, yes, it's a bit higher day rate, but if you compare it with the capabilities on the end, you might spend less. And also bigger USVs coming into the market or already on the market, which have a payload to have a observation class ROV on the back deck or within a moon pool, and even work class ROVs. And there are other concepts already on the market still with crew, but there we are looking into USVs which are above 70 meters long. So there is an upcoming market and big potential in the future to use the unit. However, what needs to be said also, there is still a challenge that there's no international legislation for using USVs, and the approval for using a USV is up to the national authorities, which in some countries is more easy than in others. But still, it's a big potential to use the vessels. Also, if you have no vessels available due to the utilization on some vessel types, as well as you have no one offshore on a USV, meaning also you reduce not only the risk, but also consumption CO2 footprint of your operation. And with that one, I would like to conclude my presentation and looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you so much to all the presenters for sharing great insights and knowledge, and also your views on vessel operation and the safety that goes together with our management of vessels, and also on the SIF incidents. I think we've seen a great mixture of both theory, process, and also real life examples here, really worth reflecting on. We are now starting out the panel session with questions, and I will start out with a few questions. I can see some of them are already being answered in the Q&A interface, but there are a couple there, and I'll start out with just asking Miriam, following a very interesting presentation on SIF, how can we ensure that the insights from the frontline generally shape decision making at higher levels, on leadership level? Do we have some insights on that or reflections on that?
Hi, thank you, Lisbeth. Very interesting few presentations. So if I understand the question correctly, because I don't know if it's just me, but there was a little bit of interference, is about how we can make sure that insights or information from the front line can really reach decision makers, right? Okay.
Exactly.
Yes, okay. Very interesting question indeed. So we're talking about closing the feedback loop here, right? So first of all, it's not enough to just collect insight, right? Collecting insight is really not enough. So there's no real secret to this. The only way to making sure that we're really getting the feedback that we need is to spending more time in the field. So being more visible as leaders and making people, so demonstrating really that we are interested, that we want to listen, and taking their ideas. Very often, especially in organizations where it's all about engineering, it's all about solutions, we tend to jump to the solution too quickly and not really ask the people who do the job day in, day out. So we think that we have a real system. We think that we give people the opportunity to give feedback and submit observations, but there's nothing like actually being there and asking people and interacting with our people and asking them these questions as well.
very makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Miriam. And to Reese, walk to work is all about the front line. What would you say, if you can pick one, what is the single most crucial factor to improving safety performance in walk to work operation?
I think I'm going to slightly dodge that question in the sense I'm going to give two answers to it, even though you've asked for one. I think that the first thing is making sure that the client is bringing in the best possible provision. And I think that it is, Hendrik touched a little bit on it. There are parts of the world where it's more difficult to achieve similar things as that. But ultimately, if you're a G+ member, that's kind of what you signed up to. If you're an IMCA member, that's what you signed up to, is to try and achieve that. And just because something's slightly harder, difficult, or fractionally more expensive is no excuse not to do it. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, and the most important thing there, is our competence. Someone's asked in the questions there about the difference between competence and training, and absolutely they're right. Competence. And if we're not training and standardizing our processes, if we're allowing skill fade or complacency to creep in, then we're going to have an issue. So it's about how we come together, for me in this phase 2 part, to define how we do that competence, standardize our processes. If I've got one vessel where someone's hanging sort of at the window of a bridge with a thumbs up, and I've got another where someone's using a green light, then we've got a problem. Very simple things like that will be the biggest thing that we can do to improve things.
Thank you so much, Reese. Henrik, back to you. I think you already kind of, or you did reflect on it at least, but you also came in with some obstacles. But will RWE use USVs in the future, and what potential do you see?
Yeah, we used USV already in the past, but this was more on a project base. But the definite answer is yes. With the USV strategy project, we did understand more what a USV is capable of, and which areas we could use USVs for. So this could be really from early development, doing environmental surveys, going into bathymetry surveys. Also, it's still a bit a challenge because you need to tow equipment. Some USVs are capable, and I know that a lot of developers are working on that one. It's still a bit challenge, but I'm pretty sure the challenge will be overcome soon. And what we clearly see is that, well, different thing. What you need to evaluate is what kind of job you want to achieve, which area you're working in. Is it more inshore, nearshore, or going offshore? You need to choose the right platform. So USV need to be seen as a platform, not as a vessel, where you attach your payload onto. And if you choose the right platform, you can outperform a conventional vessel, I would say, quite easily, and it will give you bigger weather window and different seasons to work in. So it will give a benefit to the operation, yes. And definitely we will use them.
Thank you, Henrik. Before I give the word to Ian, I can see you have your hand up. I will just ask if you're open to put in the chat whether you're also considering to use USVs. So please give your comments in the chat to that. And then Ian, over to you.
Yes, I just wanted to confirm that IMCA is already heavily involved, and I'd certainly like to invite Hendrik to join if he's not already in our MASS committee. So we call it Marine Autonomous Surface Ships. We have an active committee that's been running for some years. We have some guidelines, and also through our membership at the IMO, we have representative status. We're working with the MASS committee, the IMO's own MASS committee, to work on those future regulations. As Hendrik said, they don't exist today. You have to go flag state by flag state, but we are now working with the IMO to hopefully develop in a reasonable period of time a MASS regulation that will be globally accepted.
Yeah. Ian, I'm not involved yet, but yeah, let's take this offline. Happy to.
Yeah. Fantastic. then I'll go into the Q&A interface, and first I have a question to Reese, who gets praised for his great presentation on Walk to Work. What feedback have you had from regulators to date, Reese?
I'm going to be honest, the regulators have been fairly quiet while we go through this process. And I'm going to take that as a positive, because we know with our regulators that they can be loud and tell us when they're not happy. So I'm going to take that as positive. They've been kept up to date with it. But I think realistically they're waiting to see what we come out with. The ball's in our court as the industry. They want to see what we are doing, but I think the three-phase approach has been something that they've bought into and they understand, because they can see we're not just trying to push out a document and close the lid on it and say, right, we're done here. They can see that actually what we're striving for is continuous safety improvement across the sector. They're seeing the buy-in from the OEMs. We've included non-members in a way that we don't normally for these types of work, I think. And I think that because of the situation, and I think they're seeing that, they're seeing the positivity, they're seeing the buy-in, and I think they're happy at the moment. So provided we continue that and keep that momentum going, then we're in the right place with them.
Thank you so much, Reese. And then over to Henrik, a challenge to you. As documentation will maximum give 20% of the organization's performance, how do you compensate for the other 80%?
What do you mean exactly with the 2080?
I think it's probably a matter of culture and like other things that you might not capture from the assurance.
So that's why it's crucial for us to step on board, to see the culture, the safety culture on board, talk to the crew and see how they're conducting their work. That's why our philosophy is also to do as much paperwork upfront to explore the culture on board. Because if you do the paperwork on board of the vessel, you will not see the safety culture on board.
Very insightful. Also to you, there's another question that exactly says great insights, and there is a worry that in the industry have different approaches for vessel assurance. And could we maybe have a fit for wind database where we can share and make sure that we don't all repeat efforts that would at least benefit both vessel owners and other members of our industry. I don't know if that's only to you, Henrik, because I think some of it comes back to IMCA and G+, but an answer from you.
I can only say for RWE, so we are a founding member of G+, we are an IMCA member, so we are following the guidelines and we implemented them into our requirements. And the actual answer to the question, I cannot give them because that's an industry which have to decide on it.
Yeah, but it's a very good question and something for us to elaborate on and really consider together.
But definitely what we see if you go on board, so I've been also a vessel inspector, I've been a mariner myself, several inspectors coming in very short time and more or less asking the same. Everyone has, of course, a different scope and asking slightly different question, but more or less want to see also the same. And that's a challenge for the crew, and this is well understood. So that's why we as RWE, we try to compare as the marine warranty surveyor is going on board, that we are doing our vessel inspection at the same time, because we are looking in 50% into the same topics, that we go around the engine room, the deck at the same time as a marine warranty surveyor, just to limit the time to the crew for inspection as much as possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Then we have a bit of a broader question from Christopher from Ecuador. And he's actually asking the wider audience if there a standardized approach process or process to the Western VGG approach. Now it's jumping up and down here on my page. Prior to any walk to work and cargo operation or SOV approach, could we align on like safety zone size or VGG blade control processes the way we do communication with the control room, also roles and responsibilities on vessel. I think some of this we are aligning on, and some of this definitely we could. But please, in the audience, if you can go into the Q&A or just in the chat and give your responses to that, that would be great. And then we have one more. Also, thank you all for the insightful presentations, and really happy with the RWE presentation. Is there an appetite to develop a framework of best practice guidelines from G+ signposting to the IMCA practices and other industry standards? I think this is Kate already answering here. Some of this already exists, but this is definitely also a good question. Again, I don't think it's specific to the presenters. Mariana, I can see
maybe,
your
yes, maybe I can also just add to that I think we try to do this throughout. So beyond just the signposting page that we've put on the website, linking not just to IMCA, but to some other areas of health and safety that the G+ doesn't cover. But in every guidance that we write, we go through considerable effort not to duplicate and to kind of see what is the level that we're pitching at and what's the level that we need to reference someone else, you know, and it tends to be the sort of the how when it's things. And for example, I'm very deep in our lifting GPG or framework that's coming. You know, definitely the how of a lot of that is from the IMCA guidance we're talking about, and so it's understanding and making sure that we're putting this into the way we see all of our guidelines across different industry bodies as complementary and building on each other. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Mariana. And I totally agree. We should not duplicate, but we can link to each other. And also, I think we try to have very close collaboration, just as today with both IMCA, but also Safety On and other industry relevant organizations. One last question before we wrap up. I'd like to ask Ian, is there one thing IMCA members would like G+ members to take away from this conversation, and in your view, what would that then be?
Yeah, it's a great question, Elizabeth, and I think it's something we all need to take away that I've picked up through this is that we should never assume that people know. You know, we need more to think more about familiarization and induction, and that is, I think, great examples by Henrik, and I'm great he brought that up because I was in Japan a few weeks ago, and some of the stories I heard about the marine equipment, barges, you know, fully manned barges offshore with no lifeboats, no survival training, 27 kilometers offshore. So every part of the world is not at the same level as the North Sea. We need to think about that as we go. But even thinking of Mariana's point is there, we've got a lot of new vessels, a lot of new people who have never been offshore before. If we come from oil and gas, we think that everybody's been through Boziev many times. They're experienced hands. And we hear that people going offshore don't really know that a vessel could move sharply or you know, things are going to fall and we're going to have line of fire. Line of fire is a huge range of incidents we've found, and line of fire on a moving ship is very different if you've never been on a ship before, if you've only been in a construction yard or somewhere else. So I think that's my key takeaway, is never assume that people are familiar and inducted. We need to do more preparation of our people to be ready to go into ships, even if they're only going to be in the galley, you know, or on the bridge. It's a different working environment, and we underestimate the induction that people should have when they go offshore.
Thank you so much, Ian. And with that, I believe we have been through the questions. And again, thank you so much to the presenters. And then I've actually agreed with Ian that he's okay to do the closing remarks and wrap up this session. So, so again, over to you, Ian, and thank you again to both the audience and the presenters from me.
No, and say thank you again, Elizabeth and Mariana and the G+ team for setting up such a great session. I appreciate there are lots of other questions, and please, please contact the speakers and Reese and myself to follow up on those. My key reflections, I think taking away, we started off with a lot of conversation about data. Data is key. Sharing that data is imperative. I know it's mandatory for G+ members to submit that data. We're increasingly pushing our members to give us that data. But then secondly is what we do with that data, how we learn from it, and how we think differently. I think we have all seen the standard triangles, and we've been through many safety inductions, safety type programs. We're talking about HOP, but I really like the fact that we start to look at things differently coming from Miriam's presentation, getting people coming from outside the industry. And we've done that in some of our other seminars where we brought people in from the airline industry, or we brought a tree surgeon in and they helped us understand a little differently how they think about safety. So I think thinking differently, and certainly assuming that accidents will happen. That's one of the big takeaways I took away from Todd Conklin, and I hear it from Miriam. Great presentation. This year we'll start to ask our members to start thinking about a new measure, which is fatality and permanent impairment. So again, start focusing on these really serious injuries. How do we prevent those is a key takeaway for me. Failing safe, of course. Collaboration, absolutely, was the theme throughout all of the conversations. Together, we're working together on walk to work, but we have jointly produced the lifting guidelines, G+, IMCA, and in fact LEA, the Lifting Equipment Association. So where we can collaborate together we're stronger. I think that's a key takeaway from me. Again, just reiterating that vessel assurance is a global challenge. It's very different in different parts of the world. We do have to think differently when we go there, but we're faced with some serious challenges that we have to use local vessels and local crews. So we have to take our level of safety wherever we go, which is why we are like G+, we're moving into Japan, we're moving into Taiwan. You're holding your face-to-face forum in Korea this year. That's a growing market. So we have to take, as developers, as international contractors, as international associations, we have to take that level of safety, but we have to help that industry bring that level up to what is an acceptable international standard. And working with regulators, because I found when I went to Japan, the regulators have no regulation for offshore safety. So we have to also engage with them to encourage new regulation where it is. We have to translate our documents. G+ already started that process, and we're about to start doing that. We can't assume everybody's going to speak English. So key takeaway for me. So again, I can only say thank you to everyone who presented, everyone who joined today. I saw well over 100 people joining. Amazing. It will be recorded, so please share it with your colleagues. And also, I'm being instructed that there will be a feedback form coming back, and we do want everyone's feedback. So use this code that you see on the screen. Please give the feedback, because we can only make these sessions better for the next one. Tell us what you liked, tell us what you didn't like, what you'd like to hear more of, so that we can improve for the next time. And thanking everybody for your amazing participation today. Thank you.